There is a moment in the very first episode of The Amazing World of Gumball where a blue cat and a goldfish with legs walk past the camera, and the camera does not blink, and the world does not pause to explain itself, and you are simply expected to accept that this is now the rule. A blue cat, a goldfish with legs, a pink rabbit child smarter than her parents, and after a while you do accept it because the show never apologizes for any of it, never winks too hard, never breaks to remind you that what you are watching is one of the strangest pieces of animation that a major children's network ever quietly broadcast. Tonight on Cartoon, we are going through 150 Easter eggs and facts buried inside the amazing world of Gumball, the kind of things you only catch if you slow the whole thing down. So get comfortable, turn the lights down, and if you have not subscribed yet, it really does help us keep making these long ones. 1. The show began as a graveyard. Before it was ever a series, the creator Ben Bocquelet had spent years pitching ideas to advertising agencies and watching most of them die in meetings. And the characters he had drawn for those rejected pitches piled up in his files like a kind of private museum of unused life. When Cartoon Network's European studio asked him for a series idea, he reached back into that pile, scooped up the cast-offs, and stitched them into a single family living in a single town. The blue cat had been one design. The pink rabbit had been another. The whole supporting world of Elmore was, by most accounts, salvaged from the cutting room floor, which is why the town never feels like it was designed by one hand. It was not. It was designed by years of failure that finally found a place to live. 2. The school the Watterson kids attend is called Elmore Junior High, and if you ever pause on the establishing shots of the building, you start to notice the same thing the show keeps quietly insisting on, which is that the town itself is a collage. Brick photographs sit next to flat painted skies, doors that look hand-drawn open into hallways rendered in soft computer animation. Even the lockers, if you look at the seam where one drawing ends and the next begins, never quite line up. The show is doing this on purpose. Elmore is not supposed to look like one place. Elmore is supposed to look like many places photocopied on top of each other, which is part of why the world has the slightly anxious texture of a dream that is almost but not quite real. 3. Gumball's voice has been performed by several different actors across the series, and the reason is simple and a little melancholy. The character is 12 years old, but the actors playing him were real children, and real children grow. As each actor's voice deepened past the range the show needed, a new young performer stepped in, and the cycle repeated for the entire run of the show. The same is true for Darwin. If you ever watch the early seasons and then jump to the later ones, you can hear two different boyhoods in the same character, two different sets of vocal cords belonging to two different real lives, both of which were briefly the official sound of Gumball Watterson. The show never addressed it in dialogue. It simply let the voices age out and replace them, the way time does to everyone. 4. A recurring background character called Rob, in his very first appearance, is a small one-eyed creature glimpsed in a single frame of the school cafeteria, and almost nobody noticed him at the time. He was a design that was meant to fill the room. But somewhere in the writer's room, a decision was made that this minor, almost invisible creature would later become the show's main antagonist, the only character in the universe of Elmore who is genuinely angry at Gumball Watterson personally. His backstory when it finally arrives is that he was a forgotten extra, an unfinished drawing left over from a scene Gumball was in and then walked out of. The villain of The Amazing World of Gumball, in other words, is a piece of the show's own background that woke up. 5. The place Rob comes from has a name, and the name is The Void. In the episode of the same name, the Watterson family discovers that there is a literal pocket of reality inside the world of Elmore where the show's mistakes go to die. Discarded character designs, half-finished props, animation errors, plot holes, things that were drawn and then erased, all of them are still alive in there, queuing politely, waiting for someone to come back and finish them. It is one of the most openly metafictional ideas in any animated children's show of its era. The series is telling you, in plain language, that it knows it is a show, and that its mistakes are real, and that if you look hard enough at the seams, you will find a whole population of beings whose only crime was that the writers stopped writing them. 6. The Watterson family's last name is a quiet little tribute. Bill Watterson, the cartoonist who wrote and drew Calvin and Hobbes, is widely considered one of the great American comic strip artists of the 20th century, and the influence of Calvin and Hobbes on the imaginative, slightly anarchic mood of the Amazing World of Gumball has been openly acknowledged by people who worked on the show. Naming the central family Watterson is the gentlest possible salute, the kind of homage that does not interrupt the story and only rewards the people who already cared enough to notice. It is also a useful clue to the show's spirit. Calvin and Hobbes was about a child who lived inside his own imagination so completely that the imagination became as real as the world. Gumball is doing a similar trick with an entire town. 7. The school's homeroom teacher, Miss Simeon, is, according to the show's own dialogue, hundreds of thousands of years old. She's presented as a baboon who has been teaching school children since something approximating prehistory, which works as a joke about how every child suspects their teachers have always been there and will always be there, but the show keeps the joke running for years. Her hatred of the Watterson family is presented as ancient. Her relationship with Principal Brown, the dog who runs the school, is presented as a long and weary romance. There is something almost gothic about Miss Simeon if you sit with her for too long. She is not just an unpleasant teacher, she is older than recorded language, and she still has to mark homework on a Tuesday. 8. The show is animated in a mixed media style that has very few precedents in mainstream children's television, and the mixture is not random. Each visual register in Elmore tends to belong to a specific kind of character. The Watterson family and most of the central cast are drawn in flat, two-dimensional animation. Many of the background and adult characters are rendered in soft computer-generated 3 dimensions. Some of the side cast are stop-motion puppets, including the small clay creature called Mr. Small. And large portions of the world, the buildings, the skies, the cars, are simple photographs of real places. The argument the visuals seem to be making is that childhood and adulthood, fantasy and reality, the imagined and the documented, are all sitting next to each other in the same frame, with no fence between them. The longer you watch the show with this in mind, the more pointed the choice becomes. A character rendered as a soft, 3-dimensional model is rarely a small, joyful child. A character rendered as a photograph is almost never a hero. A character rendered as a flat, 2-dimensional cartoon is almost always somebody the show wants you to root for. The show is, in some respects, training your eye, episode by episode, to attach feeling to texture. By the time you have watched a season of it, you can almost guess the role a new character will play in the story by the medium they are drawn in. It is an extraordinary piece of visual literacy to be installed into a children's audience without ever announcing what it is doing. 9. A character called Sussy, a girl in Gumball's class, has an entire body that appears to be a stop-motion chin, animated by a real human chin filmed upside down. The reason Sussy looks like that is that she was animated by filming a real performer's mouth and inverting the footage so the chin becomes a head. It is the kind of background gag that you can easily mistake for a stylistic flourish, but the technique is genuinely uncommon in television animation, and the show uses it for one specific character with quiet consistency for years. Sussy is, in production terms, a small piece of a real human face glued into a cartoon and given a name and a personality. She is also somehow one of the show's most beloved minor figures. 10. Although the setting of Elmore is repeatedly implied to be in the United States, the show itself was produced primarily out of Cartoon Network's European operation, with animation handled by studios outside the United States for most of its run. This is part of why Elmore has a faintly off-balance Americana. The cars look almost like American cars. The school looks almost like an American school. The signs look almost like American signs. The whole place has the quality of an American town designed by people who have studied American towns very carefully without ever fully belonging to one, which gives Elmore the same dream of the foreign atmosphere as something like a Twin Peaks set in suburbia, only animated and aimed at children. 11. Mr. Small, the school's life coach and counselor, is a recurring character rendered as a small, lumpy clay figure in a sea of 2-dimensional animation. His clay-ness is part of the joke. He spends his days giving spiritual advice nobody asked for to an entire school full of beings who exist in a flatter dimension than he does, and he does it sincerely, with the steady, wide-eyed earnestness of a man who genuinely believes everything he is saying. The show treats him affectionately, but it never lets you forget that his medium is different from everyone else's. Mr. Small is, in a way, what the show looks like when it tries to be wise. He has the texture of a Sunday craft project trying to explain the meaning of life. 12. Nicole and Richard are the Watterson family parents, and the dynamic the show keeps returning to is that Nicole is hyper-competent, exhausted, and tightly wound, while Richard is enormous, gentle, and almost willfully unaware. The interesting thing about this pairing, when you look at it across the show's run, is how often the writers will quietly imply that Richard's incompetence is not stupidity, but something closer to a survival strategy. He is happy in a way that Nicole almost never gets to be. He notices small kindnesses she misses while she is keeping the family alive. The show does not want you to flatten him into a dumb dad joke. It wants you to notice that he is the only adult in the house who seems to be at peace, even though the bills are crushing them and the world is plainly falling apart. 13. In one episode, Richard goes to college and graduates in a single day, and the joke of the episode is also a quiet thesis about him. Once he applies himself, he is not actually stupid. He is, by some readings, deliberately not trying, because trying is the thing that made his life painful when he was younger. The show keeps quietly returning to the idea that Richard is the way he is on purpose, that his slow grin and his couch-shaped life are a refusal to participate in a system that would chew him up if he engaged with it. It is not a children's show theme exactly. It is the show smuggling something almost mournful past the censors by hiding it inside a fat pink rabbit eating a sandwich. 14. Anais Watterson, the youngest of the three siblings, is presented as a 4-year-old genius pink rabbit who is consistently the smartest person in any room she enters. The joke is at first that she is a small child being underestimated by her older brothers, but the joke matures across the seasons. As Anais ages a year or two over the course of the show, her loneliness starts to bleed in around the edges of the comedy. She is too clever for her family, too clever for her school, too clever for her age, and she has nobody at her own level to talk to, which the show treats with quiet, occasional tenderness. Anais is funny because she is small and brilliant. Anais is sad when the show wants her to be, because being small and brilliant is isolating. 15. Darwin Watterson started his life in the family as a literal pet goldfish, the same orange goldfish you would see in any small bowl in any home in the world. The conceit the show offers is that one day, because Gumball loved him so much, Darwin sprouted legs, climbed out of the bowl, and joined the family as a brother. The family accepted this without resistance. The brother was simply, from then on, the goldfish. The thing the show does with this premise that you might not notice the first time is treat Darwin as the moral center of the family. He is the most loyal, the most loving, the most generous, the most easily wounded, and the most reliably good. The premise looks like a joke. The execution treats it as a kind of small miracle that the Wattersons happen to live with every day. 16. The color palette of the Watterson house is one of the show's most underrated jokes. If you watch the show with the sound off for a few minutes, you start to notice that the living room and kitchen have been painted in shades of cream and pastel green that match almost nothing on any of the characters, so that wherever the family moves, they look slightly miscast against their own home. The cushions are a little wrong, the carpet is a little wrong, the wallpaper does not match the curtains. The show never comments on this, but the implication is gently funny that the Wattersons live inside a room that was decorated by somebody else, and that they have given up trying to redo. Even the family dog, before they ever get one, would look out of place. Their house has the texture of a place they inherited and never quite finished moving into. 17. Penny Fitzgerald, Gumball's eventual girlfriend, spends the first several seasons of the show as a small peanut-shaped creature with antlers, and it takes a long stretch of the series before the show reveals what she actually is underneath. The reveal happens in an episode in which her father, who has spent her entire life convincing her that her natural shape is shameful, finally fails to keep her contained, and she breaks out of the peanut shell to discover she can change form at will. The metaphor is not subtle, and the show does not want it to be. It is a story about a young girl being told to hide herself by a parent who is afraid of what she really is, and the show treats her liberation from that shell as one of the most genuinely emotional moments in its entire run. 18. Carrie Kruger, a small ghostly figure in Gumball's class, has one of the show's quietest and most morbid backstories. Carrie is a ghost. She is, in the show's logic, a child who is also somehow dead, walking around the halls of Elmore Junior High in a black sheet with 2 empty eyes, attending classes and pining after a boy. The show never lingers on the obvious question of how a child can be dead. It simply lets her exist. There is one running thread in which she becomes interested in food and finds, to her sorrow, that she cannot taste anything, which the show plays partly for comedy and partly for a peculiar small ache. Carrie's name, as far as fans have pieced together, is a near direct nod to two horror touchstones, the title character of Carrie and Freddy Krueger, and the show is happy for you to notice. 19. Tobias Wilson, the small rainbow-colored boy with a headband, is one of the few characters in the show whose family the writers genuinely explore in depth. His father, Harold Wilson, is, in a recurring joke, a slightly smaller and slightly less impressive version of his own son, while his mother, Jackie, is the warm, exhausted center of the family. They also have a daughter, Rachel, who in the early seasons is presented as a teenage rainbow-colored girl in Gumball's brother's age range. The strange thing about the Wilson family across the show's run is how the show keeps quietly suggesting that they were once richer than they are now, that their pride is greater than their bank account, and that Harold's bluster is a coping mechanism for a slow social decline. The show never says any of that out loud, it just keeps painting it in the background. 20. In one episode, the entire family is shown the script of their own show, a stack of printed pages with their dialogue on it, and they react with horror at the realization that their lives are being written down by someone they cannot see. The episode is one of the show's most directly metafictional, and it follows the implications further than most cartoons of its era would dare. The Wattersons try briefly to escape the writers, only to discover that they cannot. The show offers no comforting resolution. It simply lets them go back to their lives, slightly aware that the lives they are about to keep living are not entirely theirs. It is one of those rare moments in a children's show where the characters seem to glimpse the camera and then politely choose to ignore it. 21. The opening title sequence of The Amazing World of Gumball is one of the most efficient introductions to a cast in modern animation, and almost every frame in it is loaded with detail you can easily miss. The family is shown running through the town in a sequence of quick cuts, and in the background, in single frames, characters who will become important later are visible standing on porches, looking through windows, peering from cars. The show is doing a magician's flourish in its first 30 seconds, planting the supporting cast in plain sight so that when they walk into a later episode, you have already seen them. If you go back and watch the opening after finishing a full season, you will catch faces you did not notice were faces the first time around. The choice is more meaningful than it might first appear. Most animated comedies treat their title sequence as a brand exercise, a chance to show off the protagonist and the logo. The show is using its title sequence as a small piece of world building, and the cumulative effect across years of viewers watching it is that the supporting cast accumulates a kind of familiarity even before they have spoken a line. By the time the show is willing to center an episode on a side character, the audience already has, somewhere in the back of their head, a flicker of recognition. They have been seeing this character for years in the title sequence without knowing it. The introduction has been happening the entire time. 22. The school bus driver is a recurring character called Rocky Robinson, and he is meaningful to the world for a reason most viewers do not immediately register. Rocky is the son of the show's most consistent, grouchy neighbor, Mr. Robinson, and Rocky is the kind of warm, hopeful, gentle young adult that Mr. Robinson plainly cannot stand. The dynamic between them is one of the show's quietest tragedies. The father wants nothing to do with his son. The son adores his father anyway. The show plays this for laughs most of the time, but it returns to it often enough that it accumulates a kind of weight. Mr. Robinson does not hate Rocky because Rocky has done anything wrong. He hates Rocky because Rocky is happy. 23. The show's title sequence music is built around a single bright cyclical melody, and behind that melody, if you listen carefully, you can hear the sound of children laughing and shouting in a school playground layered in as a kind of ambient texture. That little oral detail is part of why the title sequence feels immediately like a place rather than a logo, and it is one of the unspoken reasons people who grew up with the show recognize the opening from the first half second. The show was built by people who paid attention to small sound design choices that most children would not be able to articulate, but every child could feel. 24. A recurring background detail across the series is that the Watterson family's car keeps changing color, shape, and apparent make from episode to episode without comment. Sometimes it is a battered station wagon, sometimes it is a hatchback, sometimes it is a different color altogether. The show is not being lazy. The inconsistency is part of the joke that the world of Elmore does not have to obey continuity in the way a more conventional show would, because the world of Elmore is a collage held together with a glue stick. The car is whatever shape it needs to be for the episode it is in. It is a small piece of evidence that the show's reality runs on rules closer to dreams than to physics. The same logic applies, if you look for it, to the layout of the Watterson kitchen, the color of the front door, the number of windows on the upper floor, and the placement of the family photographs on the wall. The house itself is, in a real sense, never quite the same house twice. The show would rather draw the house that the episode needs than enforce a house that exists across episodes. The decision is part of how the show keeps episode production moving across long seasons, but it is also part of the show's quiet honesty about how memory works. You do not, in your real life, remember the precise layout of the kitchen of the house you grew up in. You remember the kitchen. The show is willing to do the same. 25. Banana Joe, the small yellow banana boy in Gumball's class, is one of the most quietly disturbing characters in the show if you sit with him for long enough. He is, by the show's own logic, an actual banana being raised by two adult bananas, and his eventual fate as a piece of fruit walking around on legs in a world full of beings who eat fruit is left dangling in the background of every scene he is in. The show occasionally makes jokes that gently graze the edge of this question, but it never resolves it. Banana Joe is loud, friendly, faintly ridiculous, and exactly the kind of character the show seems to enjoy throwing into the foreground precisely because the implications of him are so deeply strange. 26. Bobert is a small robot in Gumball's class who has, in various episodes, been shown to be capable of nearly anything. He can fly, he can fire weapons from his hands, he can hack networks, he can stop time or something close to it. The recurring joke is that Bobert is treated by everybody around him as a slightly socially awkward classmate rather than the most powerful being in the school, and the show consistently lets him exist within the boundaries of a quiet, slightly lonely boy who would simply like to make friends. The joke and the sadness are in the same place. Bobert could end the world. Bobert is mostly worried about whether the other children like him. 27. Tina Rex, the school bully, is a Tyrannosaurus, not a humanoid dinosaur. Not a small reptile in a jacket, a full-sized Tyrannosaurus Rex roaming the halls of an ordinary school, somehow squeezing through doors built for children, and somehow accepted by the teachers as just one more student. The thing the show does with Tina that becomes more interesting the longer you watch is reveal that her aggression is largely a learned response to a father who is, if anything, even more terrifying than she is. Tina is not built for the world she is moving through. The world is built for smaller animals, and she has spent her whole life trying not to break the furniture. The bullying, by the time you see her father, looks more like a survival strategy than a personality. 28. The Watterson neighbor, known across the series as Mr. Robinson, is, in production terms, a small puppet-like character animated to look like an old British man with a long nose, and the show plays him as a kind of cosmic complainer whose every interaction with the Wattersons leaves him angrier than he was before. Across the show's run, Mr. Robinson endures, by the show's count, a series of escalating misfortunes, inflicted entirely by accident by Gumball and Darwin, and the show keeps coming back to him because his suffering scales. The first time, it is a knocked-over bin. By the later seasons, it is something closer to spiritual collapse. The show treats him with a kind of affectionate cruelty, like a children's writer remembering what it felt like to be a neighbor to children. 29. In one episode, Gumball and Darwin uncover what they believe to be a deep secret about Mr. Robinson, that his entire life is a performance and that his real self is utterly different from the one he shows the world. The episode is played for comedy, but it is also a quiet meditation on something the show keeps returning to, the gap between the face a person presents and the person actually living inside them. The Robinson household is full of these gaps. The husband is performing one identity, the wife is performing another, and neither of them seems particularly happy. The show, in classic fashion, does not solve any of this. It simply notices it and then walks on. 30. The principal of Elmore Junior High is a small brown dog called Nigel Brown, and his recurring storyline is his long, mostly hidden romantic relationship with Miss Simeon. The pairing is one of the show's strangest and most loyal long-running jokes, an ancient baboon and a small dog conducting a slow, embarrassed office romance that everyone in the building seems to be aware of and politely ignore. Principal Brown is not a strong administrator. He is not even a particularly attentive one. He is a man or a dog deeply in love with a coworker who is mostly just trying to get through the school day without anyone noticing where his eyes keep drifting. The school continues to function around him by sheer cosmic accident. 31. Hector is a giant, kindly monster the size of a small mountain, and he is one of the show's quietest pieces of horror. Hector lives in the woods outside Elmore with his mother, a witch who keeps him calm with potions, and he is presented for most of his appearances as a gentle, friendly creature who simply wants to play with the other children. The show then reveals, slowly and in fragments, that Hector's calm is artificial, and that without his mother's potions, he becomes destructive on a scale that nobody in the town is equipped to handle. The implication the show keeps gesturing at without spelling it out is that Hector is the most powerful being in Elmore by an enormous margin, and that the only thing standing between Elmore and total destruction is the patience of a single, very tired witch. 32. An episode entirely focused on Hector ends with one of the most visually startling sequences in the entire show. A long, almost wordless stretch of cinematic destruction that looks more like a piece of a serious animated feature film than a Cartoon Network episode. The show's animation staff seem to take real pride in episodes like this one, the rare moments where the budget and the schedule allowed them to swing for something that looked like cinema, and the result is a piece of television that feels noticeably more ambitious than the show that surrounds it. Even if you do not remember the dialogue of the episode, the closing minutes tend to lodge themselves in viewers' memories as something close to genuine awe. 33. The show has an ongoing fascination with the idea that the older generation of Elmore is not, on the whole, doing very well. Nicole Watterson works herself into pieces at a job she hates for a boss who seems designed by the show as an emblem of corporate cruelty. Richard is so beaten down by his own past that he has chosen to opt out of adulthood almost entirely. The teachers are exhausted. The neighbor is bitter. The principal is in love with the wrong person. Even Mr. Small is, beneath his earnestness, a man whose advice nobody ever follows. The town is, in a way, a portrait of a kind of low-grade, quiet despair shared by almost every grown-up in it. The children are the only people in Elmore who still seem to believe anything will get better. 34. The Watterson home is, by the show's recurring jokes about the family finances, perpetually one bad week away from being foreclosed on. There are episodes in which the family is shown the bank's collection notice, episodes in which they are evicted and have to fight their way back, episodes in which a stranger explicitly comes to repossess them. The show treats this with the brittle humor of people who are themselves used to thinking about rent. It is, on its surface, a show about a blue cat doing silly things in a school full of strange animals. Underneath, it is a show about a family that is permanently afraid of losing the roof over its head. The roof never quite falls, but the fear is steady and the show is honest about it. 35. The show was created in part during a period when British and European animation talent had been gravitating toward Cartoon Network's London-based studio, which had a small but devoted creative culture, and many of the show's writers and storyboard artists came up through that environment together. This is part of why the show feels different from its American Cartoon Network siblings of the same era. The pacing of jokes, the slightly drier instinct, the tolerance for melancholy, the willingness to let a scene end on something quieter than a punchline, all of those instincts are recognizably the children of a different television tradition than the one Cartoon Network's main programming had been raised in. 36. There is a stretch of episodes in the show's middle seasons in which Gumball and Darwin become genuinely obsessed with a girl in their class called Masami, the daughter of a wealthy cloud-shaped industrialist, and the obsession is briefly a recurring plot engine before being quietly retired. Masami is one of the show's clearest examples of how it built and discarded subplots without ever announcing what it was doing. She is at one point a major figure in the social life of the school. She is, by the end of the series, a face in the background. The show's casual relationship with which storylines it picks up and which ones it lets dissolve is one of the things that makes Elmore feel like a real social ecosystem. People drift in and out of relevance. The show simply lets them. 37. Penny's father, the antlered peanut-shaped Mr. Fitzgerald, is the source of one of the show's most quietly upsetting parenting arcs. He is presented in the early seasons as a comically intimidating dad, the sort of figure who looms over a teenage romance and disapproves of his daughter's boyfriend. But the show then keeps walking the joke deeper into a real place, until by the time of Penny's transformation, it becomes plain that the disapproval is not a sitcom dad's grumpiness, but a genuine fear of his own daughter's nature. He is, by some readings, afraid of what she will become if she is not contained. The show treats him with surprising sympathy. He is wrong, the show insists, but the show also lets you feel why he is afraid. 38. A recurring background detail in many of the school scenes is that the same group of background children walk past the camera in slightly different costumes, slightly different color palettes, slightly different proportions. The show is reusing assets, but it is doing so in a way that becomes part of the texture of Elmore, the sense that the same handful of strange beings are everywhere all the time, that the town really is small enough for you to bump into the same person 3 times in a single afternoon. It is the trick a long-running cartoon plays on you when its budget is finite. It uses the limitation to deepen the sense of place. 39. The town's police force is represented mostly by a single character, a small donut-shaped officer called Donut Cop, whose ongoing project across the show's run is the increasingly hopeless attempt to catch Gumball and Darwin in the act of something. He is one of the great minor figures of the series. He is incompetent, he is humorless, he is utterly devoted to his work, and the show repeatedly suggests that his entire identity is wrapped up in his uniform. He is not the cleverest joke in the show, he is one of the most reliable. Every appearance of Donut Cop pulls the story toward the slightly grim, slightly absurd register the show does best. He is the Law of Elmore. The Law of Elmore is a donut. There is also a quietly sad recurring beat the show keeps returning to, which is that Donut Cop, when not in uniform, has very little life. He has no family that the show ever depicts in any detail. He has no real social circle. His friends, to the extent that he has them, are his co-workers. The implication is that the uniform is, for him, what passes for a self. The show plays this for comedy. The show also, in small, honest beats, lets you feel the loneliness underneath it. He is the Law of Elmore because he has, very gently, nothing else. 40. There is a long-running visual gag, easy to miss, in which the sky over Elmore is often a photograph of a real sky rather than an animated one. If you pause the show in the middle of an outdoor scene, you can sometimes see the clouds are not drawn. The clouds are clouds. They were photographed somewhere on some real morning by some real person and then dropped into the world of Elmore as a backdrop. The effect is small but powerful. It means the kids of Elmore are walking around under a sky that exists in our world, which is part of why their town feels uncannily like a place you have driven past. 41. In production terms, the Watterson family's couch is one of the most photographed objects in the show. The family is constantly on it. The opening of episodes is constantly on it. The closing of episodes is constantly on it. And the couch itself, if you look at it carefully across the seasons, very slowly accumulates the dings and stains and small visual injuries of a real piece of furniture in a real house. The animation team is paying close attention to its own props. The cushion that gets ripped in one episode tends to stay ripped. The mug that breaks tends to disappear from the shelf. The show does not draw attention to this, but the texture of the family's life is being quietly tracked by the artists across the years, and the couch is a kind of slow witness to it. 42. The show went through several discrete visual eras over its run, and the changes were largely the work of an internal evolution rather than a single redesign. The early seasons were softer, slightly more cluttered, slightly more lo-fi in their backgrounds. The middle seasons sharpened and grew more confident with their use of mixed media, leaning harder into photography and 3-dimensional rendering for non-Watterson characters. The later seasons, by the time the production team had years of experience together, are notably more cinematic in their staging, with shot choices that resemble the framing of live-action film more than the framing of typical children's television. If you watch a season 1 episode and a season 6 episode back-to-back, you can see the studio learning out loud. 43. An episode in which Gumball plays a video game and gets stuck inside it is one of the show's most loving homages to the visual style of older console games, with sequences animated in deliberate pixel art and other sequences animated in deliberately low, polygon 3-dimensional graphics. The references are specific. The musical sting choices in those sequences are specific. The artists who worked on the episode plainly cared about the era they were referencing, and the show let them treat it as a genuine love letter rather than as a quick parody. It is one of the rare moments in the series where you can feel a particular subset of the staff being given the keys for a half hour, and they spend the entire time decorating. 44. In one episode, the family gets a microwave from the future that, against any reasonable physics, opens a portal to other realities. And the way the show uses that microwave for the next 20 minutes is one of the cleanest examples of its willingness to lean into pure surrealism. Gumball and Darwin keep stepping into the microwave and emerging into different visual styles, different animation techniques, different art conventions, and the show lets each one play for as long as the joke can sustain it. The episode is also one of the clearest statements of the show's identity. The world of Elmore can be drawn in any style. It can be photographed, it can be filmed in live action, it can be rendered as oil paint or as crayon. The microwave is a thesis statement disguised as a small kitchen appliance. The deeper implication of the episode, if you sit with it, is that the show is willing to claim every animation tradition as part of its inheritance. The history of animation is, in the show's reading, a single conversation that the show is now part of, and the show is allowed to borrow from any chapter of that conversation it wants. Most children's shows pick a style and stay there. Gumball treats style itself as a kind of vocabulary, with every previous animation tradition available as a tense or a mood. The thesis itself is grander than the appliance suggests. The show is, in some respects, refusing to be only one show. The show is, when it wants to be, every show, 45. Scattered across the run is a small number of episodes that are best described as direct parodies of specific film genres, including a martial arts homage, a slasher horror homage, and a documentary homage. The interesting thing about these parody episodes is that the show always plays them straight enough that they could almost work as the genre they are imitating. The horror episode is genuinely tense in places, the martial arts episode is genuinely well choreographed. The documentary episode commits to its format. The show has the discipline that good parody requires, which is the willingness to play the thing being parodied with respect, rather than only mocking it from the outside. 46. Leslie is a small flower in Gumball's class, a literal tulip walking around on a stalk, and he is one of the show's quietest case studies in how its background cast was given small but real arcs over the show's run. Leslie is, in his early appearances, a punchline. By his later appearances, he is a young person with hobbies, with personal taste, with a slow, building friendship with the other kids. The show was rarely interested in giving its background characters a big spotlight, but it was very interested in letting them slowly become more themselves. If you only watch a few episodes, Leslie is a flower in a class. If you watch the whole run, Leslie is a young person, 47. A recurring joke across the show is that the universe of Elmore has more than one god, or no god, or that God is one of the characters in the show depending on which episode you are watching. The show plays with theology the way it plays with continuity, with cheerful inconsistency. In one episode, a powerful entity is treated as a kind of divine figure. In another, the family asks the sky a direct question and receives a kind of answer. In another, the cosmology is rebooted entirely. The show is not trying to build a serious metaphysics. It is more accurately treating the entire idea of a divine order as another kind of joke that the world of Elmore can wear and discard. It is, in that sense, a deeply secular show that happens to keep dressing up as a religious one. The closest the show comes to a stable theological position is the implication that whatever runs the universe of Elmore is itself a kind of writer, that the family is being held in the gaze of an attention that is not malicious but is also not omniscient, that the universe is, at most, a craft project that somebody is still working on. That is, in a sense, the show describing itself. The cosmology of Elmore is the cosmology of being inside a cartoon. The cartoon is the universe. The writers are the gods. The show is willing to admit this whenever the question comes up, and it tends to be funnier about it than most actual religious texts. 48. The school bus that Gumball and Darwin take every morning to Elmore Junior High is, if you pay attention to its route over the show's run, almost impossible to map. The roads do not connect to each other in a stable way. The order in which the children are picked up changes. The neighborhood the bus drives through is sometimes urban, sometimes suburban, sometimes near a forest, sometimes near the sea. The show is not trying to draw a real town. It is happy to let Elmore reorganize itself according to the needs of each episode, which is part of why the place feels weirdly larger than any animated suburb should. You cannot put a map of Elmore on a wall. The show would not let you. 49. Larry Needlemeyer is one of the show's most consistent quiet jokes about labor. Larry is a small, rock-headed man who appears across the series as the cashier at almost every shop in Elmore, the waiter at almost every restaurant, the gas attendant at the local gas station, the clerk at the bank, the worker at the supermarket, the technician at the laundromat, and so on. The implication, which the show eventually makes explicit, is that Larry has so many jobs that he is barely a person anymore. He is the cog the entire small economy of Elmore is running on. When Larry briefly stops working, in one episode the town starts to crumble within hours. He is the show's funniest, kindest, most exhausted blue-collar parable, and the show treats him with genuine affection. 50. Beyond Rob, the show's recurring villain category is a small group of characters who appear less often but with more violence, including antagonists who threaten the family from outside Elmore proper. The interesting structural thing about the show's villain logic is that it almost never lets one of its antagonists win. The threats arrive, the world bends, the family adapts, the threat retreats. The show is not, at heart, a story about defeating evil. It is a story about a family that absorbs strange threats the way a sponge absorbs water, gets a little soggier, and then moves on. The villains do not get arcs because they are not really the point. The Wattersons surviving is the point. 51. A single recurring background character appears in dozens of episodes, often standing in the same corner of the same room, wearing the same coat, looking the same direction. Fans have spent years trying to decide whether he is a deliberate joke or an accidental reuse of an asset, and the answer, depending on which member of the show's staff you ask, has occasionally been different. Whether the character is a private staff in joke, a piece of stealth continuity, or simply a useful figure to drop into a crowd, his quiet ubiquity has become part of the texture of the show. He is the ghost in the back of every photograph. Fans have given him several different names. None of them are official. 52. The show's score is the work of a small, dedicated music team, and the score is, in its own quiet way, one of the most adventurous in modern television animation. Tracks move through styles within the same episode. A romantic scene might be scored with a small jazz ensemble. A chase scene might lean into electronic textures. A quiet domestic scene might be scored with nothing but an acoustic guitar. The show is using music to tell you which emotional register a moment is supposed to live in, and it is changing register constantly. If you listen to the score in isolation, divorced from the visuals, you can hear how much of the show's slightly off-balance mood is being carried by the people writing the music. The score is also, like the visual register, doing the work of identifying characters. Certain figures tend to be scored with certain instruments, certain harmonic palettes, certain rhythmic ideas. The recurrence is subtle. You will rarely notice it on first viewing. But after a long enough exposure to the show, you can almost hear a character walking onto the screen before they are actually on it, because the score has gently shifted into the texture that belongs to them. This is a piece of craft that costs almost nothing on the visual side and pays off enormously on the emotional side, and the show's musicians clearly knew exactly what they were doing. 53. The series finale that the show was working toward when production wound down ends on a deliberate declared cliffhanger, with the central conflict left visibly unresolved. The episode in question is the kind of ending that announces, on screen, that it is not the end, that more is coming, that the story has more to say. This was a creative choice, not a censorship one. The show's team had wanted, for a long time, to wrap up the Rob storyline and the larger metafictional questions of the series across a film, and the production calendar of the original series was wound down with the intention of opening that next chapter rather than closing the existing one. Whether or not that next chapter eventually arrives in the form fans expect, the choice to end on a cliffhanger was in itself a kind of statement of confidence. 54. There is a long stretch of the show in which Gumball is portrayed as deeply and at times painfully in love with Penny, and the way the show treats his feelings is one of the more honest portrayals of adolescent infatuation in animation aimed at his age range. He is awkward, he is foolish, he is occasionally dishonest with himself, he is occasionally jealous, he is occasionally generous in ways that surprise him. The show does not flatten his crush into a single joke. It treats Penny's eventual returned affection as a real reward earned over a real number of episodes, which gives their relationship a weight that most children's animated couples never accumulate. It is rare for a kids' show to take a 12-year-old's heart this seriously. 55. The show's title cards, the small bumpers that introduce each episode by name, are themselves a tiny gallery of visual experiments. Some of them are illustrated, some are photographed, some are entirely typographic. Some pretend to be something they are not, mimicking the title cards of other shows or films. The artists in charge of those small interstitials seem to have been given a real amount of creative freedom, and as a result, the title cards function across the run as a kind of low-key art project tucked into the front of every episode. Most viewers blink past them. The ones who pause are usually rewarded. 56. The Watterson family lives at a numbered address in a quiet residential street that, depending on the episode, is sometimes shown as essentially the only inhabited part of the entire block. The houses next door are often empty in establishing shots. The grass on the lawns is sometimes a slightly different shade of green between neighbors. The show is doing the thing it always does, which is to make the neighborhood feel real enough to live in, and unreal enough to keep slipping out of your grasp. The street outside the Watterson house is, in some episodes, a busy thoroughfare. In others, it is a sleepy nothing. The show is uninterested in being consistent and very interested in being atmospheric, and the street rewards the choice. It is somewhere that genuinely looks like home if you do not look at it for too long. 57. There is a recurring side character who works at the local supermarket and whose entire arc across the show's run is a slow, embarrassed romance with another supermarket employee. The romance is conducted almost entirely in glances. They never have a big love scene. They never declare anything publicly. But across enough episodes, the show keeps placing them in the same frame, in the same uniform, with the same small, unspoken tension between them, until you notice that you have been watching one of the most patient love stories in modern animation play out in the background of a children's show. The show is generous to its background figures. They are given the dignity of an interior life, even if it has to be conveyed entirely through where their eyes are pointed. 58. The show makes a recurring joke of breaking the fourth wall in ways that feel less like a metafictional flourish and more like a slow loss of structural integrity. Characters address the camera, characters notice the camera, characters complain about how the show is being made. The interesting thing the show does with this technique is that it never feels like a single bit. It feels like the slow erosion of the wall between Elmore and the audience, as if the wall was always going to give way eventually and the show is just letting it happen. By the later seasons, the breaking of the wall is so casual that it is essentially the show's resting state. Elmore is a place where the residents have always suspected they were being watched. The show eventually agrees with them. 59. Sarah G. Lotto, a small marshmallow girl in Gumball's class, becomes in the middle seasons the show's resident self-aware fan stand-in. She is, by the show's own logic, a fan of Gumball and Darwin as if they were celebrities, and her appearances tend to involve her reacting to the central characters as if they were figures in a show she watches at home. The joke functions on multiple layers. Sarah is, within the world of Elmore, a fan of beings she sees every day. Sarah is, within the world of the show, a fan of beings whose lives are being recorded. The show is making a small, affectionate gesture at the audience, putting one of you inside the cast and letting Sarah be the one who already knows the truth that the rest of Elmore is still pretending not to notice. 60. A recurring joke about the existence of a second, parallel Elmore inhabited by a slightly different version of every main character runs through a small handful of episodes without ever fully committing to a multiverse mechanic. The Mirror Wattersons are not exactly evil. They are not exactly virtuous either. They are simply different choices the universe could have made. The show treats this as a kind of casual cosmology, refusing to spell out its rules, but letting them flicker in the background of certain episodes like a possibility. The implication, if you sit with it, is that there are many possible Wattersons, many possible Elmores, many possible Gumballs, and that the one you are watching is just the one the show happens to be paying attention to today. 61. The school's cafeteria food is, in a running gag, presented as actively dangerous. The lunch lady wields it as a weapon in some episodes, the food itself moves in others, and on one occasion, a sandwich is treated as essentially alive. The joke is the kind of joke schoolchildren make to each other in real life about school food, given a literal body by the show's willingness to take any childhood exaggeration at face value. The cafeteria is also where some of the most tender small social moments of the series take place, with Gumball and Darwin sharing seats with characters who turn out to matter to them. And the show often lets its lunchroom scenes carry an emotional weight that the dialogue is not directly addressing. The food is a joke. The room is somehow a heart. There is a smaller recurring detail across the cafeteria scenes that is easy to miss, which is that the same students tend to sit at the same tables in roughly the same configuration in episode after episode after episode. The show is, again, paying attention to the kind of detail real schools have. Children in real schools sit with the same people for years. The show knows this. The seating chart of Elmore Junior High is, by the later seasons, a stable enough piece of geography that you can recognize the social structure of the school by looking at who is sitting next to whom. The cafeteria is the social map of the school. The map is consistent. The show built the map quietly over years without ever drawing it on the wall. 62. The show's voice cast included a wide range of British performers, in part because of where the show was produced, and in part because of an aesthetic choice the show was making consciously. Many of the adult characters carry accents and rhythms that would feel slightly out of place on a typical American kids show, and the show leans into that. Mr. Robinson sounds like a man who has been complaining since the 1970s. Mr. Small sounds like he has been to too many drum circles. The teachers sound like teachers. The bus driver sounds like a bus driver. The audio fingerprint of the show is, in some respects, that of an English voice ensemble translating itself onto an American setting, which gives Elmore part of its strange, faintly transatlantic atmosphere. 63. The show's casting of children to play children is a quietly meaningful choice that not every animated series of its era made. In many similar productions, 12-year-old boys are voiced by adult women who specialize in juvenile voices. Gumball and Darwin are voiced by real boys of approximately their characters' ages, and that decision gives their performances a quality of slight unevenness, slight cracking, slight unpredictability that an adult performer simply cannot reproduce. The cost of the choice is that the actors age out and must be replaced. The benefit of the choice is that for the years they hold the role, the children are real children. The show is willing to pay that cost. It is part of why the early seasons in particular sound the way they do. 64. There is a memorable moment in one of the later seasons in which the camera pulls back further and further from the Watterson family, past the room, past the house, past the town, past the sky, until you see that Elmore is essentially being held in something like a snow globe. The show does not stay long on this image, it moves on. But the implication of it lingers for the rest of the run, which is that Elmore may be inside something else, that the strange rules of the town may simply be a consequence of where the town is being kept. The show offers this idea once, lets it slip past, and then keeps living inside the town anyway. It is one of the most haunting throwaway shots in the series. 65. Anton, a small piece of toast in Gumball's class, has one of the show's quietest running jokes about mortality. Anton can be destroyed, he can be eaten, he can be ripped in half, he can be set on fire, and every time he is destroyed, he simply reconstitutes from a fresh slice of bread that was waiting at home, with no memory of the destruction. The show is making a joke about the cheapness of cartoon death, but it is also gesturing at something almost theological. Anton is, in a small way, immortal. He is not the same Anton from one episode to the next. The school does not mind. Nobody asks him whether he is the same person. He is treated as continuous because the universe finds it easier that way. There is a richer philosophical question buried under the joke that the show is, at its most thoughtful, willing to graze. If Anton's body can be destroyed and his self can be reconstituted from a fresh piece of bread, then what exactly is Anton? Is he the bread? Is he the personality? Is he some pattern of behaviors that the universe has decided to keep instantiating because it makes the social fabric of Elmore Junior High easier to maintain? The show does not answer the question. The show simply lets the question hover. Children's shows do not usually graze the philosophy of personal identity. The show is willing to graze it gently and to walk on without resolving anything. The grazing is, in itself, a kind of gift. 66. The show's depiction of Nicole's workplace, a rainbow-themed factory run by an elderly executive, is one of the most pointed pieces of commentary in the entire run. The boss is presented as a vain, manipulative, casually cruel figure who treats his employees as essentially disposable. And the show keeps coming back to him because Nicole is essentially trapped working for him. There is a story arc in which Nicole briefly attempts to leave the company and start her own life, and the show lets you feel how much she wants it and how impossible it is for her. She has 3 kids, she has a mortgage, she has a husband who is not contributing economically. She cannot afford to risk anything. The show is honest about that math, in a way most animated comedies would not be. 67. In one episode, Gumball discovers that he is, in some sense, capable of bending the rules of the universe of Elmore, and the show plays this as both a power fantasy and a quiet horror. He can rewrite small things, he can persuade reality to go in a different direction by sheer force of will. The episode lets him try this out for a while before pulling the rug gently on the implications. If Gumball can rewrite the universe, then the universe is rewritable. Then nothing he experiences is fixed. Then the people he loves can be changed at will. The show notices the implication and walks back from it. Gumball returns to the smaller world of school and family by choice, having looked at the edge of something larger and decided he does not want it. 68. Idaho, a small potato-headed boy in Gumball's class, is one of the show's strangest pieces of consistent comedy. Idaho is presented as having grown up in a kind of pastoral, possibly Amish-inflected community of root vegetables. and his ongoing struggle to adapt to the social rhythms of modern Elmore is treated with a mixture of tenderness and absurdity. He is a small potato trying to understand the internet. He is a small potato trying to understand romance. He is a small potato trying to understand a world he was not raised for. The show plays this for laughs, but the show is also, every so often, willing to let Idaho be a kind of mirror for the immigrant child in any number of real towns. He is not from Elmore, he is doing his best. 69. A recurring joke runs through the show that the Watterson family television receives, on some channels, broadcasts from realities that are not their own. They flip through channels and see briefly glimpses of other shows, sometimes versions of themselves, sometimes versions of the world they would not want to live in. The show uses this gag both for comedy and for a kind of metafictional commentary about how children's television in particular can function as a small portal into other lives. The family is, in those moments, an audience. They are watching shows the way you are watching them. They are doing what you are doing. And once you notice that, it becomes harder to forget the position you are in as a viewer of a family that is watching a family. 70. The show has a recurring gag about the family's relationship to pets, which is that they have a great deal of trouble keeping animals alive in the house. Across the seasons, previous pets are mentioned and then quickly waved away, and the show is being mildly grim about how families really treat their pets. The slow forgetting, the unsupervised consequences, the children who promise to take care of an animal and then forget. The show is not cruel about it. It is gently observational, and it puts the Wattersons in the company of every real family that ever brought home a fish in a plastic bag and learned a week later that it had not survived. 71. The Watterson family's neighbor on the other side from Mr. Robinson is sometimes a sentient cloud, sometimes a tall plant, sometimes nobody at all, depending on the episode. The show treats the other side of the street as a kind of soft, narrative-free zone where it can place whichever character a particular story needs without worrying about whether they have appeared before. It is the cartoon equivalent of a stage door, a place where new figures can walk on and old ones can quietly walk off, and the show does not have to explain anything. The instability of that side of the street is not lazy continuity. It is the show's chosen way of allowing itself the freedom to introduce a new character at any time without paying narrative tax for it. Elmore has a stable side and an unstable side, and the show benefits from both. 72. The Wattersons are not the only family the show portrays with affection, and one of the things that becomes clearer the longer you watch is that almost every family in the show is, in its own way, doing its best with what it has. The Fitzgeralds are loving but afraid. The Wilsons are proud but hurting. The Robinsons are dysfunctional but real. The Banana family is somehow a banana family. The show is rarely interested in painting families as villains. It is interested in the texture of how families work, which families it lets you see and which families it leaves shaded in the background. It treats domestic life as the central engine of the show, and almost every domestic scene, no matter how absurd the species involved, is recognizable as something that happens in a real house. 73. One of the most repeated visual jokes in the show is the moment in which a character runs across the screen in the foreground and an unrelated character runs across the screen in the background at the same time, both reacting to entirely different events. The technique is essentially silent comedy, the kind of gag the great silent film comedians built their careers on. The show's writers and storyboard artists used it consistently across the run, often without drawing attention to it, and the cumulative effect across an entire episode is that Elmore feels populated. Every shot has a second story going on at the edges. The viewer is not supposed to follow both. The viewer is supposed to feel that the world they are watching does not stop existing when the camera looks away from it. 74. The show has a long-running gag about the local hospital, which the show treats as essentially staffed by amateurs and patrolled by paperwork. The medical care available in Elmore is presented as so unreliable that the Watterson family essentially treats every illness at home, and the running joke covers everything from broken bones to surgery. The show is gently grim about this. It is making a small, ongoing comment about the kind of public services that a working-class family in a working-class town can actually access. And it is asking, without making a speech about it, what happens to people who cannot afford to be sick. The hospital is funny because it is bad. The hospital is also bad. The show is happy to hold those two truths in the same frame. 75. In keeping with its mixed media instincts, the show occasionally drops a live-action sequence into the middle of an otherwise animated episode, in which actual real human beings appear briefly on screen interacting with the cartoon characters. These sequences are rarely the center of an episode. They are usually short, dreamlike, and used for a specific tonal effect. But the existence of those sequences is one of the show's clearest gestures at the idea that the line between the real world and the world of Elmore is, in the show's view, porous. The show is happy to remind you that it was made by real people in real rooms, and that those real people are still somehow inside the cartoon they made. The show is the studio waving at you briefly through the screen. 76. The voice cast of the show was, especially in the early seasons, partly recorded in London and partly recorded in the United States, with adult roles often performed by British actors and child roles often recorded with American performers. This split is not random. It reflects the show's production split between the European studio and the American audience the show needed to reach. The result is that the family at the center of the show sounds American, while the world around them tends to sound British, and that small audio dislocation is part of why the family feels slightly alone in their own town. They are the loudest American voices in a soundscape that is, underneath them, leaning quietly British. The show is, in some respects, a transatlantic experiment that disguised itself as a domestic sitcom. 77. A recurring detail across the show is that products advertised on the television within Elmore have names that are slight, deliberate misspellings of real-world brands, and the way those brands behave inside the show is often a small joke about real-world advertising. A fizzy drink in Elmore behaves the way the show seems to believe a real fizzy drink behaves to children who have been told to drink it. The show is poking at the advertising industry the creator came from gently and laying its critique into the background of the world so that the children watching the show pick it up by osmosis rather than by lecture. The show was made by a man who used to design those advertisements, and it shows. 78. Gumball's grandfather on the Watterson side, an elderly rabbit by the name of Frankie, by most accounts has an arc that becomes one of the more painful family stories in the series. He is, by his first appearance, a charming wastrel who left Richard alone for most of his childhood, and his return to the family is the kind of moment the show handles with more honesty than its premise might suggest. Richard's longing for his father, Richard's anger at his father, Richard's eventual quiet refusal to forgive his father, all of it is given more time than this kind of B-plot tends to get in a children's show. The show is willing to sit in the discomfort of an adult son meeting a father who failed him, which is, again, more grown-up material than the casual viewer might remember Gumball being capable of. The arc is also one of the show's most important small contributions to understanding Richard. He is the way he is, the show is gently saying, partly because his own father did not show up for him. Richard's refusal to be a competent adult is partly a refusal to inherit his father's particular brand of competence. He has decided, somewhere underneath the surface of his every joke, that he would rather be present and useless than be successful and gone. The show treats this as a real choice rather than as a personality flaw. The grandfather's arc lets the show say something about Richard that no other arc could quite have said, and the show, by giving the story room, lets it land. 79. The Watterson family's grandmother on the cat side, Nicole's mother, is one of the show's most quietly fearsome figures. She is presented across her appearances as the source of Nicole's discipline, Nicole's perfectionism, and Nicole's tightly wound exhaustion. The show is gentle but pointed about it. Nicole's mother is not a monster. Nicole's mother is the kind of figure who taught her daughter to be perfect because the world would not forgive her for being anything less. The show makes this case not by stating it, but by showing the way Nicole's body language changes when her mother walks into a room. The most accomplished animated comedies often do their best emotional work in posture rather than dialogue, and this is one of those moments. 80. The show frequently makes use of typographic gags in which the word for an object appears on screen in the place of the object itself, or in which a character speaks a word that materializes in the air in front of them. The technique borrows from comics, from early animation, from print advertising, and from European art house cinema. The show treats it as a basic part of its toolbox rather than as a special effect. Words in Gumball can be physical, they can be picked up, knocked over, set on fire, eaten. The implication, if you sit with it, is that language in Elmore has the same kind of substance as everything else. Speaking a word is the same as drawing one, which is the same as building one. The town is made of language as much as it is made of paint. There is a quietly philosophical implication tucked underneath this technique that the show is, in some respects, training its audience to notice. Words have weight. Words shape the world. Words, in some sense, are the world. Children's shows do not, on the whole, deliver lessons in semiotics. The show is willing to deliver one gently through a small repeated visual gag, and the gag is so charming that almost nobody notices what is being installed in them while they laugh at it. 81. A recurring background joke in the show involves a small group of strangers in identical suits who appear in crowd scenes, in conference rooms, in coffee shops, and never quite have lines. They are sometimes coded as men in suits in the older sense, vague background corporate figures, and they sometimes function as the show's stand-in for the kind of nameless authority that ordinary people in real towns feel pressed by. The show never identifies them or gives them a backstory. They are simply there, in the background of certain episodes, watching. Whether or not they are meant to mean anything specific is left to the viewer. The show is happy to seed small ambiguities into its background and let the audience decide whether they are pictures or paintings. 82. The show has a recurring fondness for the kind of joke in which a character says a single absurd line with the rhythm of a profound philosophical statement, and the show lets the line hang in the air long enough for the audience to wonder whether it was supposed to mean something more. The technique is used most often with Mr. Small, but it appears across the cast. The pause after the line is the thing the show is interested in. The pause is where the comedy lives. The show trusts its audience, even an audience of children, to recognize the rhythm of mock profundity and to find it funny. It is one of the more sophisticated comic devices the show uses, and it is built into the dialogue at the level of the writing room. 83. By some accounts, the show's relationship with its own continuity is sometimes referred to by its writers as a kind of soft canon in which the events of an episode happen, but the world does not necessarily have to remember them. Houses are destroyed and rebuilt without comment. Characters die and reappear. Major revelations are simply not referenced again. The show treats this as a feature rather than a flaw. The world of Elmore is allowed to forget its own injuries the way real towns mostly do, with most disasters becoming, within a year, the kind of thing people simply do not bring up. The show is borrowing the rhythm of community memory rather than the rhythm of serialized drama, and it benefits from the borrowing. 84. Alan is a small floating balloon boy whose entire personality is built around being relentlessly, irritatingly positive. He is presented across the show's run as the kind of figure who is so determinedly kind that he becomes a source of friction in his own social group. The show plays with the idea that Alan's optimism is itself a kind of vanity, that he is so committed to being the nice one that he refuses to acknowledge real conflict, and his eventual romance with Carmen, a small cactus girl in his class, is one of the show's most tender slow burns. The balloon and the cactus understand. The show keeps suggesting that being close to each other is risky, and they choose each other anyway. It is one of the show's prettiest small love stories. 85. The show occasionally introduces a character for a single episode, treats them as if they have always been part of the world, and then never references them again. The technique is unusual in serialized comedy, which tends to either commit to a recurring cast or to clearly mark the one-off characters as visiting. The show prefers a third path, in which a stranger walks into the show, behaves as if they have lived here forever, and then walks out, leaving you to wonder whether you simply did not notice them before. The effect, accumulated across the series, is that Elmore feels like a town with a much larger population than you ever quite see at once. There are always more people. You only meet some of them. 86. The episode in which the show introduces what might be its most directly horror-coded character is one of the few in the entire run that is allowed to play almost entirely as a horror film for a sustained stretch. The lighting drops, the color saturation drops, the score becomes minimal, the camera holds longer than it usually does. The show, which is mostly built out of fast cuts and bright reactions, demonstrates here that it knows perfectly well how to slow down and let an audience feel afraid if it wants to. The discipline involved is considerable. Most children's shows that attempt horror do so by leaning into a kind of cartoon spookiness that signals to the viewer that the fear is safe. This episode does not do that. It is genuinely uneasy, and it remembers that children, contrary to a certain kind of safety-minded animation, are capable of being scared by the right kind of stillness. The show trusts its viewers to handle it, and the trust is rewarded. 87. A small running motif across the show is the moment in which the Watterson family is shown, in moments of stress, embracing each other in a particular pose that returns over and over again. The pose is one of the few moments of unstaged warmth the show consistently allows itself. It is not played for jokes. It is not undercut by a punchline. It is simply held on screen for a beat longer than it strictly needs to be, and then the show moves on. The pose by the later seasons becomes a kind of visual shorthand for the show's central thesis, which is that the Wattersons are, despite everything, a family that loves each other. The show is rarely sentimental in the open. The show is consistently sentimental in those particular silent frames. 88. The show has a notable willingness to write its parent characters as flawed, frightened, and emotionally complicated, and the most consistent example of this is Nicole's anger management. Across the seasons, the show keeps returning to the idea that Nicole's temper is real, that she has hurt people with it, that she is still afraid of what it can do, and that she has to work every day to keep it under control. The show is not playing this for laughs. It is showing you a mother who is trying to be better than the version of herself she could easily become. Children's shows do not usually write their mothers like this. The show writing Nicole like this is, in its own quiet way, one of its most generous choices. 89. The show's animation pipeline involves a remarkable amount of compositing work in which characters who exist in completely different visual languages must somehow be made to share a frame convincingly. The artists who handle this part of the show are, in the credits and in interviews, one of the most consistently praised parts of the production. The reason the show looks the way it does is not just because somebody had the idea of mixing media. It is because a small group of people learned how to make a flat cartoon stand in front of a photograph and have it look as if they belong together. The seams are tiny, the lighting is matched, the shadows are sold. The work is, in animation terms, mostly invisible, which is, in animation terms, the highest possible compliment. 90. Mr. Fitzgerald, beyond his role as Penny's father, has one of the more underappreciated production details in the show. His design changes subtly across the seasons, his eyes opening slightly more, his posture loosening slightly more, the show drawing him as a man who is slowly, very slowly, learning to be less afraid of his own family. The show never spells this transformation out. It simply lets him soften over the years. By the later seasons, the same character who once seemed to embody all the worst instincts of overprotective parenthood has become, in posture and expression, someone closer to a man who is trying. The show is willing to give him that journey without making a speech about it. 91. The show's English language scripts often contain wordplay that depends on the rhythm of British rather than American English, and the show is happy to let that wordplay sit even in scenes set firmly in what is meant to be an American small town. There are jokes that land slightly differently for an American viewer than for a British one, jokes that depend on a turn of phrase that simply does not exist in the same way on different sides of the Atlantic. The show makes no apology for this. The dual audience is part of how it was built. The transatlantic flavor is part of what gives Gumball its odd, slightly off-balance verbal music, in which the cadence of the dialogue does not always match what you expect. 92. In one stretch of the show, Darwin becomes the unwitting subject of a low-grade religious movement, in which other children at the school decide he is some kind of small holy figure and start treating him accordingly. The episode is funny. The episode is also one of the most explicit examples of the show's interest in how easily groups of young people convince themselves that a stranger is special. The show does not lecture about it. It simply lets the joke run, allows Darwin to be flattered for a while, allows him to be uncomfortable for a while, and then lets the group, with the casual cruelty of crowds, move on to a new figure of devotion. It is a small parable about fame, told in the format of a school day. 93. The show makes frequent use of a recurring kind of joke in which a character reaches for an object, and the object is, in the next frame, not the object they reached for, but a slightly altered version of it. A cup becomes a slightly different cup. A pencil becomes a slightly different pencil. A door becomes a slightly different door. The technique is used so often that, after a while, the viewer almost stops registering it consciously, but it accumulates a kind of low-level instability in the visual world of Elmore. Things change shape when you are not looking at them. The town does not stay still. The Wattersons are living in a world that flickers in small ways at the edges, and they have learned, without seeming to notice, to ignore it. 94. The show's use of fonts and graphics is, in a way most viewers never consciously notice, one of its most distinctive features. Signage in Elmore tends to use slightly off versions of fonts that look familiar but are not. Newspaper headlines tend to have slightly off typography. Notes pinned to fridges tend to be written in a font that is almost but not quite the one you expect. The cumulative effect is that the entire town reads slightly wrong, even before you start paying attention to the characters. The show is happy to live in this near-miss space, in which everything looks recognizable until you focus on it, at which point it reveals itself as something the show invented rather than something the show borrowed. 95. By some readings, a recurring romantic geometry between several side characters runs through the show as a quiet, long-term storyline, with each character secretly in love with someone who is in love with someone else who is in love with someone else. The show lets the geometry play out in the background of episodes that are nominally about something else entirely. The joke is patient. The joke pays off slowly. The show is happy to let a small thread of romantic complication run, untouched, in the background for months of broadcast time, the same way real friendship groups carry quiet, years-long crushes that everyone almost knows about. 96. The show's relationship with celebrity guests is essentially non-existent, and that absence is one of the more meaningful structural decisions of the production. The show very rarely brings in famous voice talent to play one-off characters, and when it does, it tends to underplay the casting. The choice keeps the world of Elmore feeling sealed. The viewer is not pulled out of the show by the sudden, recognizable voice of a film star. The show belongs, for almost its entire run, to its own quiet ensemble of performers, many of whom were not famous when they joined the show, and most of whom remain, even now, far better known for their work on it than for anything else. The show is a writer's room and a voice cast first. It is not a celebrity vehicle by careful design. 97. The show makes use of stock sound effects from libraries that have been used in animation and film for decades, and the choices are, again, deliberate. A specific scream you may have heard in dozens of older productions appears more than once in Gumball. A specific cartoon thud appears more than once. The use of these stock effects ties the show in its sound design to a long tradition of animation that came before it. The show is, in a small audio way, paying tribute to the medium it is working in. The artists are nodding to the artists who came before them. The viewer does not need to know any of this for the show to work. The viewer simply hears, somewhere underneath the action, the long ghost of every cartoon that came before. 98. A recurring sight gag across the show is the moment in which a character will, in an instant of extreme emotion, briefly turn into a different art style entirely, becoming, for a single frame or for several seconds, a hyper-realistic painting, a piece of pixel art, a watercolor, a stained glass window, or a piece of three-dimensional sculpture. The technique is used as a kind of emotional underline. The character is so angry or so sad or so in love that they have temporarily outgrown the visual register they normally live in. The show treats this as natural. The world of Elmore is, again, a place in which the rules of representation are negotiable, and the rules will bend if you press hard enough emotionally. It is one of the most visually inventive comedy techniques in modern children's television. 99. The show's depiction of school authority figures is consistently, gently scathing. The principal is incompetent. The teachers are exhausted. The counselor is dispensing pseudo-spirituality. The librarian, when she appears, is a small clay figure who treats reading as essentially a punishment. The implication that the show makes about institutional school authority, accumulated across hundreds of episodes, is that institutions are mostly held together by tired people who would rather be doing something else, and that the children inside those institutions are, on the whole, doing more important work than the adults around them realize. The show is not anti-school. It is anti the particular failures of schools. It is gently siding with the kids without saying so out loud. There is a quieter implication the show keeps gesturing at, which is that the adults inside the school were themselves once children inside a school like this one, and that the system has, slowly, broken them. Miss Simeon was somebody's child. Principal Brown was somebody's child. The lunch lady was somebody's child. The show is, in its sideways way, making an argument about the cycle that produces tired adults out of children who used to have hope, and it is asking, without saying so out loud, whether the children of Elmore are going to be allowed to break the cycle or whether they are going to become the next generation of exhausted adults. The show does not answer the question. The show is, perhaps wisely, content to leave it open. 100. The show's interest in the lives of the smallest, weirdest residents of Elmore is consistent and is, in a real way, the engine of its longevity. The show keeps finding new corners to look into. A small mailbox on a quiet road, a small pebble in a yard, a small bird on a fence. The show is willing to follow any of them into a story, and it does so often enough that the viewer eventually realizes Elmore is not a town with a cast. Elmore is a town with a population, and the cast just happen to be the ones who get the most screen time. The show is generous about giving everyone else moments. That generosity is, in its own way, one of the most genuinely democratic instincts in modern animation, and it has shaped the entire texture of the show. 101. The show occasionally pauses for a long, deliberately quiet, establishing shot of an empty Elmore Street at dawn or dusk. The kind of frame that has nothing happening in it, no character, no joke, no event, just light falling on a row of houses or the empty parking lot of a small shop. These shots are not common, but when they appear, they tend to last longer than they need to, and they tend to be backed with the gentlest possible bed of score. The show is borrowing in these moments from a tradition of animation that uses stillness as a feeling rather than as a pause between jokes. The viewer is not supposed to find anything in the frame. The viewer is supposed to feel that the town goes on existing when the family is asleep, that there are hours of Elmore that nobody films, and that those hours are part of why the town feels alive. 102. By most accounts, one of Gumball's classmates is the child of an immigrant family raising a child in a culture that is not their first, and the show plays with this respectfully, allowing the family their dignity, allowing slightly different rhythms, and avoiding the easy joke that a less careful production might have made. The show is consistently more careful with cultural reference than its surface might suggest. The town of Elmore is built out of the entire census of strange beings, and the show's instinct when it remembers is to treat each piece of that census as worth its time. That family is, in that respect, a small example of the show's better instincts, treated with patience rather than as a setup for a punchline. 103. A long-running show within a show appears in the world of Elmore, a children's program that Gumball and Darwin watch obsessively, in which a small group of brightly colored characters get into adventures of escalating absurdity. The show within the show is, by the writer's design, a parody of the kind of program Gumball itself superficially resembles, with smaller, simpler jokes and clearer messages. The joke the show is making about itself in those moments is gentle but pointed. It is, the show is admitting, the kind of program that broadcasts on the same channel as the program it is pretending to be, and it is in conversation with that history. The show within the show is also, on its own terms, very funny, which is the only way that kind of layered joke really works. 104. Juke is a small boombox-headed boy whose lines, when he has them, are mostly produced as a series of vocalized beatbox sounds rather than as words. The show treats Juke as a member of the class who simply communicates differently from the others, and the other students treat him the same way. The show does not make a big deal of his condition. He has friends, he has rivals, he has crushes, and the show is happy to let him be a full participant in the social world of the school without ever requiring him to explain himself. The character is, in his small way, one of the show's quiet gestures at inclusion. Juke is not a metaphor. Juke is a kid. The other kids treat him as a kid. The show treats him as a kid. That is, in the end, the joke. 105. There is an episode in which the show parodies the structure of a kind of internet video that, by the time the episode aired, had become enormously popular online, the long voiceover essay about a piece of pop culture. The show's parody of this format is, depending on which side of the lens you are sitting on, either affectionate or pointed, and the show seems to find both readings available at once. The parody is, on its own terms, a kind of preemptive commentary on the eventual existence of the very kind of video you are listening to right now. The show was capable of being aware that its own depth was going to become a topic, and it was capable of laughing about it before the rest of the internet caught up. 106. There is a stretch of late episodes in which the show begins quietly to acknowledge, through small visual cues, that it is aware its run is ending. Family photographs accumulate in the Watterson living room. Background characters get small farewells. Side plots that had been left hanging are tied off in passing. The show is not making a big, tearful gesture about its own ending. The show is simply, in the quiet way it does most of its best emotional work, packing up the house. The viewer who is paying attention can feel the show putting things in their proper places. The viewer who is not paying attention can simply watch the jokes. The show, as it always does, gives both viewers the option and asks neither to acknowledge the other. 107. By most accounts, the Donut Sheriff, the senior officer above Donut Cop, is a small but persistent reminder that the show is willing to keep escalating its background bureaucracies into the foreground when it needs them. The sheriff is a calmer figure than Donut Cop, more competent, slightly more dangerous, and his appearances tend to slow the rhythm of the show down for the length of the scene he is in. The show is willing to use this. The sheriff is a figure for whom the rest of the cast quiets down. He is not loud, but the show keeps deferring to him, and the cumulative effect is that he carries a kind of authority that none of the other adults in Elmore quite manage. The show is good at this kind of trick in which a character feels heavier than the screen time spent on him would suggest. 108. A small but persistent design joke runs through the show about the way doors work in Elmore. Specifically, the show repeatedly shows characters opening doors from one room into rooms that should not be there, into rooms that exist only for the duration of the joke, into rooms that are clearly larger than the building containing them. The technique is so consistent that it amounts to a small piece of magic realism baked into the architecture of the town. Doors are not stable in Elmore. Doors lead sometimes somewhere else. The Wattersons have learned to live with this. The show never explains it. The show simply allows the houses of Elmore to keep producing the rooms the story needs, the way a dream produces rooms when a dream needs them. 109. The show's depiction of the internet, which becomes more frequent in the middle and later seasons, is one of its sharper running commentaries. Online life in Elmore is presented as a place where people are crueler than they would be in person, where attention is a scarce and corrosive resource, where strangers can be summoned by mistake, and where children are particularly vulnerable. The show is not subtle about its position on this, but it is also not preachy. It tends to bake its critique into the structure of the joke. The internet is funny in Gumball, and the internet is also, in Gumball, a place where small, awful things can happen. The show is willing to let those two notes ring together, which is again more honest than most children's programs of its era ever attempted. 110. A small running joke across the show involves the Watterson family being shown, in the background of certain scenes, watching commercials that closely resemble the kind of advertising the show's creator used to make in his pre-television life. The show is, in those small embedded ad parodies, doing a kind of personal autobiography. The viewer cannot easily see this without context. The viewer who knows the context, however, can sometimes feel that the show is letting its writer wave through the screen at a younger version of himself. It is, in its quiet way, one of the most personal things the show ever does, and it is hidden in the background of the family's living room television. The choice is more touching the longer you sit with it. The writer's pre-television career, by his own telling, was years of pitching ideas to clients who did not want them, watching small, charming animated worlds die before they could be born. The fact that the show keeps quietly drawing those failed worlds back into the background of the Watterson living room, letting them play out on the family's small television as if they had been ordinary commercials all along, is, in some sense, the show finishing them. The unproduced campaigns get to live briefly on a fictional family's screen. The viewer sees them for a second, the viewer moves on. Somewhere, in a quiet way, a piece of work that never happened is happening anyway. 111. The show's central thesis, if it has one, is that the world is strange, and that the strangeness is mostly survivable if you are loved. The Wattersons survive everything Elmore throws at them, not because they are smart, although Anais is, and not because they are powerful, although Nicole is, and not because they are virtuous, although Darwin is, but because they keep coming home to the same couch. The show is not didactic about this. The show is, in fact, willing to mock it. But across the entire run, when the show needs an answer to the question of how anyone could possibly live in a town like Elmore, the answer is the same. They have each other. The show takes that idea more seriously than its surface might suggest. It is, underneath everything, a domestic comedy about a family who love each other through every flavor of catastrophe. 112. The show's relationship with cliffhangers is a careful one. The series is not, on the whole, a serialized show. Each episode largely resets. But the writers were willing, several times across the run, to plant a cliffhanger that would not pay off for half a season or longer. The viewer is being trained gently to remember things. The viewer is being asked gently to wait. The show is, in this respect, more ambitious than the children's programming around it. It treats its audience as capable of holding more than one frame at a time. The show's eventual final cliffhanger, when it comes, is the largest of these. It is also, in keeping with the show's habits, the one most willing to bet on the audience's patience. 113. One episode of the show centers on a single small object, a household item that the Wattersons assume is broken and try unsuccessfully to replace. The episode is one of the quietest in the series. It mostly takes place inside the house. It mostly involves the family talking to each other. The action is minimal, the stakes are low, and by the end of the episode, the object has been fixed, the family has not been changed, and the show has resolved its plot in the smallest possible way. The reason the episode is memorable is that it demonstrates, more clearly than the show usually allows itself to, that Gumball is happy to be a domestic story. The big set pieces are not the show's only register. The small Tuesday night with the family is also the show, perhaps more truly than anything else. 114. The show's musical numbers, which appear scattered across the run, are often produced by the same in-house music team, and are often used to deliver emotional content. The rest of the script is too embarrassed to deliver directly. The songs are where the show allows itself sincerity. The songs are where the show allows itself sentiment. The songs are where Darwin and Gumball can say in plain words that they love each other, that they will always be brothers, that their family is the most important thing in their lives. The rest of the show, the scripted dialogue, is generally too proud to deliver lines like that. The songs are a kind of pressure release. They are also often some of the most directly moving moments in the entire series. 115. The Watterson family has, across the show's run, accumulated a number of small in-jokes that recur without explanation, including a particular phrase Gumball uses when he is panicking, a particular noise Darwin makes when he is upset, a particular dance Anais does when she is pleased, a particular sigh Nicole makes when she's at the end of her rope, and a particular smile Richard wears when he's about to do something foolish. The show treats these as the kind of shorthand that builds inside real families across years of life together. The viewer recognizes them after a while. The family recognizes them too. The show is, in those small, repeated beats, recreating the texture of a family who have lived a long time in the same house, where small private signals have become a kind of private language, and where the language is the family. 116. The show keeps quietly suggesting, throughout its run, that the act of growing up in Elmore is something fundamentally different from growing up anywhere else. The children of the show are exposed, in a casual, everyday way, to existential threats, to fourth wall breaks, to mirror universes, to weather that breaks the laws of physics, to teachers who are millennia old, to neighbors who are clearly being slowly destroyed by life, and to one classmate who is a literal ghost. The show is mostly cheerful about all of this, but there is a quieter thread running underneath the comedy that asks what it would actually do to a child to grow up here, surrounded by all of this, expected to handle all of this. The answer the show keeps gesturing at is that the children adapt, that the children develop a kind of casual flexibility about reality, and that the children, by adulthood, will probably be unrecognizable to anyone who did not grow up alongside them. Elmore is, in that respect, a town that produces a very specific kind of survivor, and the Wattersons are right in the middle of producing 4 of them. 117. A recurring joke runs through the show about the family's mailbox, which seems to receive letters from increasingly unlikely senders, including, on at least one occasion, a letter that addresses the family as if they were characters in a show. The mailbox is, in production terms, a useful narrative device that lets the show drop in plot triggers from outside the world without having to explain who sent them. The mailbox is, in thematic terms, the family's small daily reminder that the universe is paying attention to them. The Wattersons live in a house, on a quiet street, in a strange town, and somebody, every few weeks, sends them mail that should not, by any reasonable logic, be possible. They open it, they read it, they deal with it, they go back to dinner. The show is more or less treating the mailbox as the place where the weirdness of the universe meets the most ordinary possible piece of domestic life, which is, in many ways, the show's entire thesis statement in a single small metal box. 118. The show makes ongoing use of what might be called the camera that knows too much, in which the framing of a shot quietly tells the viewer something the characters in the scene have not noticed. A character is calmly explaining their plan while behind them the consequences of the plan are visibly unfolding. A character is reassuring themselves about something while beside them, the thing they are reassured about is in fact happening. The show is borrowing in these shots the rhythm of cinematic visual irony, the kind of trick a sophisticated live-action film uses to let the audience laugh at how oblivious the characters are. The show uses this trick with surprising precision, and the cumulative effect over a long run of episodes is that the viewer becomes used to looking at the corners of the frame, used to checking the background, used to assuming, correctly, that the camera has placed something there for them to find. 119. A recurring background figure appears in the school halls and is sometimes drawn slightly differently from one appearance to the next. Never enough to be a different character, but enough to suggest that the figure is not quite stable. Fans have spent years debating whether the small inconsistencies are deliberate or accidental, and the show has mostly declined to settle the question. The figure is, in some readings, a tiny piece of intentional weirdness baked into the background of every shot. In other readings, it is a useful asset reused with slight variations. The show seems to enjoy the ambiguity. It does not want to settle whether the figure is a joke or a happy accident. The viewer is invited to decide, which is itself, in a small way, a generous artistic choice. 120. By the time its original run wound down, the show had become, by most accounts, the longest-running animated series Cartoon Network had produced out of its European studio by a considerable margin. And that longevity is not accidental. It is the result of a production team that learned how to operate a small, slightly idiosyncratic studio for years on end without losing what made the show feel like itself. Long runs of animation tend to drift. Characters get redesigned, voices get rebooted, tones get sanded down. Gumball managed, across a long run, to keep returning to the same core sense of itself. The cast aged, the animation evolved. The town stayed the town. The Wattersons stayed the Wattersons. The achievement of running a show like this for that many years without it eating itself alive is one of the things the industry has more recently started to acknowledge in retrospect. At the time, it just seemed like the show. In hindsight, the consistency of its identity is one of its quiet feats. It is worth pausing on what that consistency cost the people who made it. Long runs of animation are difficult places to work. The hours are long, the deadlines are constant, the budgets are finite. The fact that the show kept its tone for as many seasons as it did is, in part, a story about a creative team that protected the thing they had built from the slow erosion of the production process. They cared about the show in the way you would care about a small, careful piece of personal art. They were, in fact, paid to do this. They were also clearly doing it for reasons beyond pay. The love is on the screen. The love is part of why the screen still works. 121. The show's recurring depictions of the news media, including a news anchor who appears in a number of episodes as a small bear in a suit, are, like most of its recurring institutional jokes, gently scathing. The anchor reads any news, however absurd, in the same flat voice. The graphics on his screen are barely legible. The studio behind him is clearly held together with rope. The show is making a small joke about how television news in general handles even genuine catastrophes with the same forced calm, the same boring graphics, the same exhausted competence. The joke is not new. The joke is not original. But the show keeps it consistent enough, across enough appearances, that it becomes one of those quiet, small, ongoing critiques the show is willing to make of the world its audience is growing up in. 122. By some accounts, the mother of Tobias and Rachel Wilson, the pink matriarch named Jackie, has accumulated one of the most quietly tragic backstories in the entire cast. The show is gentle but persistent about the implication that Jackie is unhappy in her marriage, exhausted in her parenting, and lonely in her social life, and that the bright pink exterior she presents is a kind of armor. The show does not say this out loud. The show simply lets Jackie be tired around the edges, lets her eyes go far away in the middle of a sentence sometimes, lets her catch herself, lets her keep going. The show is, again, treating a side character as a real person, and the cumulative weight of those small choices is, after a few seasons, considerable. The Wilson household is, in many ways, the show's most realistic family. The Wattersons are louder, the Wilsons are sadder. 123. A recurring use across the show is the dropping of stock footage of real natural disasters, real explosions, real fires into otherwise animated sequences. The footage is usually used briefly, and it is usually used to escalate a joke beyond what an animated explosion could carry. The technique is the inverse of what most animated comedies do, which is to escalate by drawing larger. The show escalates by suddenly importing real images of catastrophe and putting them into a frame they do not belong in. The effect is dissonant, a little uncomfortable, and very effective. The show is willing to import the texture of real disaster into a children's program because the show trusts its own tonal control. The world of Elmore is constantly grazing the real world. Sometimes the real world bleeds in the form of an old piece of film of an actual fire, and the show treats this as a kind of joke that it expects you to be capable of laughing at. 124. Hot Dog Guy is a small Frankfurter in a bun who appears across the show's run, and he is one of the strangest pieces of long-running comedy in the entire cast. He is, on his face, a sentient hot dog. The show treats him as a man with a job, a life, a personality, and ongoing concerns about his place in the world. There is, in his appearances, a quiet running joke that he is unsure whether he is supposed to be eaten, and the show is willing to let that joke get genuinely dark before pulling back. Hot Dog Guy is, in a way, the show's most pointed example of how the cast of Elmore live with implications the show is too kind to spell out. He is delicious. He is a person. Both of these things remain true at the same time, and the show is unwilling to choose between them. 125. The show has, across its run, a small number of episodes that are essentially anthologies, in which the family is barely present, and the story is handed over to side characters. These episodes tend to be among the most experimental in the run, and they are also among the most beloved by hardcore fans. The willingness of a show to step away from its central cast for a full episode is, in television terms, an act of trust. The audience is being asked to care about the side characters as much as the main ones. Most shows would not risk this. Gumball did so several times, and it tended to be rewarded. The side characters carry their own weight. The audience does, in fact, care about them. The show was right to trust them with episodes. 126. The show has occasionally engaged in what might be called genuine satire of online culture, with episodes built around comment sections, video sharing platforms, viral fame, and the slow distortion of children's attention by algorithmic feeds. The show was being made through a stretch of years in which children's relationship with the internet was changing in real time, and the show was paying attention. The satire is rarely heavy-handed. The show is, more often, content to drop in a small, accurate detail, a particular kind of phrasing, a particular kind of slow camera move, a particular kind of comment thread, and let the audience recognize themselves. The recognition is the joke. The show is in conversation with the way its audience actually spends its time, and it is willing to be honest about what that time is doing to them. 127. In one stretch of the show, the Watterson family is briefly and in different episodes given access to wealth, fame, and influence, and the show consistently treats these as temporary states that the family is, in a way, relieved to be done with. The Wattersons do not want to be rich. The Wattersons do not want to be famous. The Wattersons would like, on the whole, to be left alone with each other in their slightly broken house. The show keeps reaffirming this. It is willing to spend an episode imagining the family inside any number of fantasies of upward mobility, and it consistently lets them come home to the couch by the end. The thesis is steady. The thesis is, in some respects, the show's emotional spine. They are happiest where they already live. That is, the show keeps insisting, enough. 128. The show makes occasional use of an animation technique in which a character will, in a moment of disorientation, briefly become a child's drawing of themselves, a crude crayon version of the character superimposed for a beat over the more polished animation. The technique tends to be used when a character is, in the show's logic, regressing emotionally to a younger version of themselves. It is one of the most efficient pieces of visual storytelling the show has in its toolbox. The character has lost their adult self. The character has been reduced briefly to the version of themselves they were as a small child. The show does not explain the technique. The show simply uses it, and the viewer almost always understands it instantly. It is one of the small visual languages the show invented, and it works. 129. A small but persistent joke across the show is that the town of Elmore has a rich history, complete with founders, monuments, and unresolved political scandals, and that no resident of the town actually knows any of this history correctly. Different episodes give wildly different accounts of who founded the town, when, and why. Different statues are attributed to different people. Different streets are named for different reasons. The show is, in this respect, gently mocking the way real towns remember their own pasts, with everyone telling slightly different versions of the same story, and with the official record nowhere to be found. Elmore is a town built on contradictory memories. The show keeps it that way on purpose. 130. In its later seasons, the show increasingly used the format of an episode to tell stories that were openly emotional rather than openly comedic. There is an episode about the inevitability of growing up, an episode about a small friendship that is ending, an episode about a parent who has gone away, an episode about an old promise that cannot be kept. These episodes are not the bulk of the show. The show is, on the whole, still a comedy. But the willingness of the show to spend an episode in a quieter register is one of the reasons it kept its audience for as long as it did. The audience was, in real time, growing up alongside the show. The show was willing to grow up with them. That is a rare and generous thing for a long-running children's program to do, and the show did it with surprising consistency. 131. A long-running visual gag involves the clock in the corner of the Watterson living room, which is, depending on the episode, sometimes broken, sometimes running backwards, sometimes correct, sometimes ticking far too quickly for the action of the scene. The implication, accumulated across enough episodes, is that time inside the Watterson house does not run on the same schedule as time outside it, that the house exists in a slightly different temporal pocket from the surrounding town. The show never spells this out, but by the time you have noticed the clock a dozen times, you have started to feel that there is something faintly closed off about the family's domestic life, that the time spent inside the house is not quite the same as the time the school day measures, and that the Wattersons may be living in some small recurring way on their own schedule. The clock is, in production terms, a tiny background detail. In thematic terms, it is one of the show's quieter pieces of magic realism, tucked away in the corner of a living room where most viewers never bother to look. 132. A long-running pair of background characters, an older couple who appear in establishing shots of crowded scenes and almost never have lines, have, over the years, been adopted by fans and referred to by unofficial nicknames. The show has not corrected this. The characters have, in some sense, been adopted by the audience, given names by the audience, given backstories by the audience, and the show has been content to let that affection happen without intervening. The audience and the show are, in a small way, collaborating on the population of Elmore. That collaboration is part of why the town feels alive in a way most cartoon towns do not. The viewer is not just watching Elmore, the viewer is filling in Elmore. The show is, very generously, leaving room. 133. The show makes occasional use of what amounts to a kind of visual onomatopoeia, in which a character's sound effects appear on screen as text in the air around them, as in older comic books and silent film. The technique is borrowed from a long tradition of cartoon storytelling, but the show uses it with unusual discipline. The text is matched to the rhythm of the score. The text is matched to the color palette of the character. The text is, where possible, animated in a way that ties into the personality of the figure making the sound. A character with a calmer temperament tends to be accompanied by softer, more rounded letters. A character with a sharper edge tends to have angular text. The show is paying attention at a level most viewers will never consciously notice, and the show is rewarded for the attention by a viewer experience that feels, even subconsciously, more carefully constructed than it strictly needs to be. 134. By most accounts, a recurring side character named Clayton has a body that is, in the show's logic, a kind of fundamental piece of clay capable of taking on any form. Clayton is, in different episodes, used as a way for the show to demonstrate its commitment to the idea that identity in Elmore is, in some respects, plastic. Clayton can be anyone. Clayton can do anything. Clayton, in the show's quieter readings, is also a small parable about a child who has not yet decided who he is going to be, and the show treats him with the same tenderness it treats every other character whose adolescence is on screen. Becoming yourself is hard. Clayton has more options than most. Clayton seems no happier for it. The show is honest about the fact that having endless choices is not, in fact, the same thing as being free. 135. In keeping with its mixed media commitments, the show occasionally introduces a character whose entire body is built out of a different texture entirely, including, at various points, characters made of paper, characters made of pixels, characters made of pure color, and characters made of pure text. The technique is used sparingly enough that each new texture feels like an event rather than a gimmick, and the show is careful to give each textural character a personality that is shaped by what they are made of. The paper character is fragile. The pixel character thinks in grids. The color character does not have a clear edge to where they end. The text character has to be read. The show is, again, treating its visual register as a serious storytelling tool. The medium is the character. The character is shaped by the medium. The choice is, in a quiet way, one of the show's most artistically committed positions. 136. Despite the depth of its world, the show never published a full official map of Elmore during its main run. Fans have produced unofficial maps based on careful frame analysis, and the maps tend to disagree with each other because the show's geography does not, as discussed, hold still. The town is, by the show's own logic, slightly different shapes from episode to episode. This makes the official map a kind of impossibility. There is no canonical Elmore, there are only Elmores. The show is comfortable with this in a way most modern serialized television is not. Modern shows tend to want to publish maps and timelines and family trees as supplementary material. Gumball has, on the whole, refused. The town remains a place that does not quite obey the rules of being a place. That refusal is part of its identity. There is a small, gentle defiance baked into that refusal. The modern industry around children's animation often treats the canonization of a fictional world as a marketing exercise, in which the audience is given supplementary material so that the world can be sold back to them in pieces. The show declined to play that game. It would rather the town remain slightly mysterious than become a piece of intellectual property to be parsed. The choice is, in its own way, almost old-fashioned. The town belongs to the show. The show belongs to its viewers. Nobody is required to flatten any of it into a wiki page in order for the love to be real. 137. The show's depiction of internet phenomena is sometimes so closely tied to its specific moment of broadcast that certain episodes have, in retrospect, become time capsules of a particular era of the online world. References that were instantly recognizable when the episode first aired have, in some cases, become charmingly obscure. The show is willing to take this risk. It is willing to date itself in exchange for being current in its moment. The implication is that the show was always written for the audience it had then, not for the archival audience it would have later. The show was not trying to be timeless, the show was trying to be alive. That choice has costs. That choice also produces, in retrospect, a series of small documents of how the internet felt at very specific points in the past decade, which is, in its own way, a valuable thing for a piece of pop culture to be. 138. A recurring set of background details across the show is that the same brand of cereal appears in the Watterson kitchen, the same kind of car appears in the school parking lot, the same kind of soda can appears in the school cafeteria. The world of Elmore has its own commercial ecosystem, and the show is committed to it. The brands have their own logos, their own color palettes, their own taglines, and the show uses them across many episodes as if they were real products of an alternative world. The cumulative effect is that Elmore has a consumer culture you start to recognize, the same way you would recognize the consumer culture of a real town if you visited it often enough. The brands are not the joke, the brands are part of the texture. The show is willing to build that level of background detail because the show wants the town to feel inhabited at every level. 139. The show makes recurring use of a small visual gag in which a character's pupils, in moments of strong emotion, briefly become symbols rather than circles. A character who is in love might, for a frame, have hearts where their eyes should be. A character who is angry might briefly have skulls. A character who is greedy might briefly have currency symbols. The gag is borrowed from a long tradition of cartoon visual storytelling, but the show uses it with restraint. It does not use the gag for every emotion. It does not use the gag for every character. It uses the gag specifically, sparingly, and in moments when the visual shorthand will land harder than a verbal explanation would. The discipline involved is, again, one of the show's quiet skills. It knows when to lean on inherited tools and when to put them down. 140. A long-running implication across many episodes of the show is that the Watterson family's house is, in some respect, alive. Doors open by themselves. Lights flicker without explanation. The refrigerator hums in response to conversations. The bath turns on without being asked. The show is, in these small ongoing details, suggesting that the house knows the family, that the house has feelings about the family, that the house has, in some sense, become a kind of fifth or sixth member of the family. The thesis is never spelled out. The thesis is simply allowed to accumulate, scene by scene, across the years. By the time you have watched enough of the show, you have started to suspect that the family is not living in the house. The family and the house are living together. The show is happy to leave that suspicion in your mind without confirming it. 141. Mr. Cuddles, the deeply unsettling stuffed toy that lives with Anais, is portrayed in some episodes as genuinely sinister. Mr. Cuddles is, in the show's most willing readings, a benign and well-loved companion to a small girl who needs one. In the show's more horror-coded readings, Mr. Cuddles is something other than a toy entirely, something that is wearing the toy as a kind of disguise, something that is watching the family and waiting. The show is happy to play in both registers without committing to either. Mr. Cuddles is, in production terms, one of the most efficient pieces of horror in the entire run. He does not have to do anything. He simply has to sit on a bed, and the show can shape an entire episode around the question of whether he should be allowed to sit on that bed. The show is exploiting, with considerable craft, the fact that every child who has ever owned a slightly creepy stuffed animal already knows that the answer is not always certain. 142. The show makes occasional use of long, single-take sequences in which the camera follows a character or a group through several rooms, several conversations, several events, all in one unbroken shot. The technique is rare in animated television, partly because it is expensive to plan and to animate. The fact that the show used it more than once suggests that the production team had genuine pride in the medium and the discipline to pull it off. The long takes tend to land on emotional moments. A long take through the Watterson house ending on the family at a single moment of stillness has a different weight than a series of cuts arriving at the same place. The show seems to know this. The show uses the technique strategically. It does not do this often. When it does, the audience can feel the weight of it, even if they cannot articulate why. 143. Across its run, the show accumulated a small group of recurring writers, storyboard artists, and directors whose individual styles are recognizable to a careful viewer. Certain episodes lean visually slightly different. Certain episodes lean tonally slightly different. The show was, on its surface, a unified production, but underneath that surface, it was a series of small, creative voices being given enough room to express themselves within the larger shape of the show. The show benefits from this. The episodes do not all feel the same, even within a single season. The viewer is, episode by episode, occasionally watching the work of a particular member of the team rather than the work of the show in the abstract. The show is, in this respect, a quiet, collective project that managed to allow individual signatures to survive within a corporate format. That is rare. That is, again, one of the things the show should be remembered for. 144. In some of its most ambitious episodes, the show plays openly with the conventions of episodic structure itself, including episodes built around the idea that the episode is the last episode, episodes built around the idea that the show has been canceled, episodes built around the idea that the family has somehow fallen out of their own series. These episodes are mostly played for comedy, but they also function as a kind of running rehearsal of the show's eventual end. The Wattersons have, by the time of the actual finale, repeatedly faced the possibility that their lives might be about to stop. The show is, in this respect, very honest with its audience. The show is willing to look at its own mortality on a regular basis and let the family handle it. By the time the actual cliffhanger arrived, the audience and the family were, in some respects, both prepared for it. The show had been training everybody, gently, for years. 145. The show makes occasional use of what might be called the camera that lingers, in which a scene that would, in most modern comedies, end on a punchline is allowed to keep running past the punchline into the quieter beat after it. The family has finished arguing. The room is silent. The family is sitting on the couch. Nobody is saying anything. The camera is still there. The score has dropped out. The show is asking the viewer to sit in the room with the family for a moment longer than is comfortable. And the moment is, in its own way, more emotionally generous than any punchline could have been. The show is willing to be patient. The show is willing to let the air linger. The show is willing to be a little sad. That patience is rare in modern comedy. The show treats it as a default, available whenever a scene asks for it. 146. The show keeps coming back across its run to the basic question of whether Gumball Watterson is a good person, and the show's answer is, in keeping with its honesty, complicated. Gumball is, by turns, kind, cruel, generous, selfish, brave, cowardly, brilliant, foolish, faithful, and dishonest. He lies to his friends, he lies to his family, he lies to himself. He also, repeatedly, in the moments that matter most, chooses the harder right over the easier wrong. The show is not interested in a flat, virtuous protagonist. The show is interested in a real adolescent boy. Adolescent boys, in the show's experience, contain all of those flavors, and the show is willing to let Gumball move between them without judgment. He is not, as some children's protagonists are, a finished moral example. He is a work in progress. The show is willing to be patient with the work. The audience, by the time the run ends, has watched him become, in fits and starts, a slightly better version of himself. The transformation is never declared. It is only gently allowed to happen. That is, for a children's program, an unusually grown-up thing to attempt, and the show, for all its strangeness, attempts it with care. 147. The show's depiction of Darwin, taken across the entire run, is one of the most consistently loving portraits of a small boy in modern animation. He is gentle, he is loyal, he is willing to forgive almost anything. He is, when pushed, capable of surprising fierceness in defense of the people he loves. He is, on his face, a goldfish with legs, and the show never lets you forget the absurdity of his origin. But the show also never lets the absurdity diminish him. Darwin is given the same emotional respect as any other character in the show. His feelings are taken seriously. His fears are taken seriously. His joys are taken seriously. He grows, over the course of the show's run, into a young person with his own voice, his own positions, his own quiet courage. The show treats this as worth doing. The choice to take a side character's adolescence seriously in a show whose original premise leaned on him being essentially a sidekick is one of the show's more generous structural decisions, and it is part of why Darwin, by the end, has become one of the most beloved animated brothers in the history of children's television. 148. The show's depiction of Anais, taken across the entire run, becomes increasingly poignant the longer you watch. She is, as established, smarter than her family. She is, as established, isolated by that intelligence. But the show is unwilling to leave her there. Across the seasons, the show keeps finding small ways for Anais to be a child, to be a sister, to be a friend, to be silly, to be brave, to be wrong. The show does not want her to be only the smart one. The show is willing to let her, in carefully chosen moments, simply be the youngest member of a family she loves, and that loves her. Anais is not, by the end of the show, the same character she was at the beginning. She has, in small ways, the show is careful to track, grown. She is funnier. She is more open. She is more willing to take risks. She is in some ways the most quietly hopeful character on the show because the show keeps suggesting that given enough time, she will be just fine. The show seems to believe in her. The audience, by the end, believes in her too. 149. The show's depiction of Nicole and Richard's marriage, taken across the entire run, is one of the most quietly tender portraits of a long marriage in any modern animated comedy. They argue, they misunderstand each other, they make each other tired, they disappoint each other. They also, repeatedly, in the moments that matter most, find each other again. The show is honest about how hard it is to stay married to somebody for a long time. The show is also honest about how worth doing it can be. Nicole and Richard are, by the time you have watched enough of the show, a couple whose love you actually believe in. The show has earned that belief by being unwilling to fake it. The arguments are real, the reconciliations are real, the exhaustion is real, the warmth is real. The show is willing to let their marriage be complicated because the show believes that real love, the kind worth modeling for children, is complicated. The show treats their marriage as worth watching, and the marriage rewards the attention. 150. The show, taken as a whole, is essentially a love letter to the strangeness of being alive. It is, on its face, a comedy about a blue cat and a goldfish with legs in a town full of impossible beings. It is, in fact, a slow, accumulating argument that the world is stranger than any of us have allowed ourselves to admit, that the people we live with are stranger than we usually permit ourselves to notice, that the small moments of every day are stranger and richer than the rhythm of adult life lets us see. The show is, in this respect, a kind of permission slip. It is the show telling its audience, mostly an audience of children, that the world they live in is allowed to be as weird as it actually is, that their family is allowed to be as weird as it actually is, that their feelings are allowed to be as weird as they actually are. The show is generous with that permission. The show is consistent with that permission. The show, across every season, refuses to flatten the world it draws. That refusal is, in the end, the most important thing about it. It is the reason the show has lasted. It is the reason the show has aged well. It is the reason the show, even now, with the original run wound down and the next chapter still on the way, remains the kind of show that fans return to in the small hours of the night, looking for the texture of a town that does not exist, and a family that, on every couch, in every quiet living room of every house in their broken, weird town, look up at the same camera that is watching them and look like home. There is a particular feeling that comes from finishing a long stretch of the Amazing World of Gumball, late at night, with the room dark and the volume low. It is not exactly the feeling of finishing a great work of literature. It is not exactly the feeling of finishing a great work of cinema. It is closer in honesty to the feeling of leaving the house of friends you have been visiting for a few days, with their voices still in your ear, their jokes still under your skin, the texture of their kitchen still in your hands. The show has, across more than a decade of broadcast and rebroadcast and quiet streaming, become for a generation of people a kind of second home. It is a house they have lived in, it is a couch they have sat on, it is a family they have in some real way joined. The reason this is possible in the end is the same set of choices the show kept making at the level of its smallest details. The willingness to let a side character be a real person, the willingness to let a small joke run for years before paying off, the willingness to leave certain ambiguities ambiguous, the willingness to let the family fail and forgive each other, the willingness to take an adolescent's feelings seriously, the willingness to be, in the middle of a children's comedy, occasionally and unapologetically sad. None of those choices is large on its own. All of them together build the place. The place is the achievement. The place is what stays after the screen has gone dark. The show's original run is, for now, over. The film that is meant to continue the story has been promised, has been delayed, has been promised again, and may, by the time you are listening to this, already have arrived or still be on the way. Whatever it turns out to be, it will be a continuation rather than a replacement. It will be another room in a house that already exists. The house, the town, the family, the strange weather and the strange neighbors and the strange schools, all of it is already, in a way that the future cannot undo. Finished. It is here. It is yours if you want it. It is, in the end, one of the most quietly generous things modern animated television has produced. The town is small, the cast is strange, the family is loved. The show belongs to anyone who has ever sat on the couch with them at the end of a long day and felt, briefly, less alone in their own small house. So if you are still here, if your eyes are heavy, if the room is dark, if the night has done its quiet job and slowed you down enough to listen, this long, thank you for the company. The town will still be here in the morning with its photographed skies and its quietly impossible doors. And the family will still be on the couch, and the goldfish will still be a brother, and the small ancient baboon will still be marking homework somewhere in the building down the road. The school day will start again whether or not anyone is awake to see it. Mr. Robinson will be furious about something. Donut Cop will be patrolling. Penny will be becoming herself in some small new way. Anais will be reading something a bit too advanced for her age. Nicole will be tired, Richard will be smiling, Darwin will be loving everyone. Gumball will be somewhere making a small bad decision and then doing his best to make it right. They will be there, all of them, whether or not we are watching, because the show, in the way it always wanted to, has finally become a place rather than a program. There is nothing more to say tonight except that I am grateful to have spent the hours with you, that I hope sleep finds you easily, that I hope the morning is gentle, that I hope, wherever you are listening from, the room is warm and the world is quiet, and that if you enjoyed the video, make sure to subscribe and I'll see you in the next one.